Let's kick things off with number 10. We have the appearance of the Mahdi. Now, in simplest terms, the Mahdi is Islam's Messiah or Savior. Now, the Mahdi will rise up to launch a massive social transformation in the world in order to restore and modify all things under divine guidance. So yeah, similar to other Abrahamic religions, Jews who are waiting for the Messiah, Christians who are waiting for the second coming of Jesus, and Muslims are waiting for both the Mahdi and Jesus. Number 9, there will be moral decay. Now, according to Muslims, yes, a lot of this is happening, but there's going to come a time where this is going to be on another level that has never reached before. So the moral conditions at that time will be at an all-time low. In the Islamic Hadith, it says, "From among the potents of the hour are the following. Religious knowledge will be taken away by the death of religious learned men. Religious ignorance will prevail. Drinking of alcoholic drinks will be very common. There will be prevalence of open illegal sexual intercourse." And that's found in the Al-Muslim volume 4, pages 1503 to 1504. Then next up, this is a pretty big one. At number 8, we have Mecca being attacked and the Kaaba being destroyed. Now, one of the last signs of the day of resurrection in Islam is the destruction of the Kaaba. And the Kaaba will actually be destroyed by Zul Suwakatayn, and he will be from Abyssinia, aka Ethiopia, and will destroy the Kaaba in order to steal its treasure and Kiswa, which is the cover of the Kaaba. And the destruction of the Kaaba is actually prophesied to happen after no faithful Muslim remains on the earth. Now, I talked about this briefly when I mentioned the return of the Mahdi, but it's also prophesied that, yes, Jesus will descend from heaven. So Muslims believe that Isa, aka Jesus, did not die on the cross, but that Allah raised him up to heaven, and that he's going to return one day to defeat the dajjal, which is likened to the Antichrist. So according to the Hadith, Jesus is in the second heaven, and the Prophet Muhammad in this Hadith mentioned this, and I quote, "During the Mi'raj, which is the ascension, I met Isa on the second heaven. I found him of medium stature, reddish white. His body was so clean and clear that it appeared as though he had performed ghusl, which is an ablution cleansing of the entire body." Now, in another hadith, the Prophet Muhammad mentioned this: "Allah will send Messiah in Maryam," which is the Messiah, son of Mary. "Thus he will descend near the white eastern minaret of Damascus, clad in 2 yellow sheets, leaning on the shoulders of 2 angels." So we talked about the prophecies of the Mahdi and the Messiah, Isa or Jesus in Islam. Of course, we got to talk about the false Messiah now. So coming up at number 6, we have the false Messiah, Al-Dajjal, or the deceiver, aka the false Messiah / Antichrist in the Islamic faith. And he's a false messianic figure who will come forth before the end of time after a reign of 40 days or 40 years, and he will be totally destroyed by Jesus or the Mahdi or both of them. It just depends on which interpretation of the prophecy that you look at according to various Islamic views. But bottom line, this Dajjal or false Messiah is coming, and he's going to be destroyed. And then after that, the world will submit to God. And Dajjal, by the way, he's a bad brother. He's going to be performing miracles and deceive a whole lot of people. He's going to make it appear like he's raising people from the dead. So he's going to be really convincing. And at this time, it's going to be such a time of deception that, like, if you're not on your A game, you're going to be deceived. This guy's going to be the master deceiver. So now moving on to number 5, we have the prophecy of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, aka Gog and Magog. So now this is recorded in the Quran in the following verse: "But when Ya'juj and Ma'juj are let loose and they rush headlong down every hill." So just to talk a little bit more about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, what's going on here anyways? Well, they're located in a land that's hidden from our sight, and the exact location of where they are is unknown. But though there are many interpretations that do exist, none of these, however, can be said to be 100% absolute. But they, the people of Yajuj and Majuj, are human beings, and according to a narration or a hadith, they are the offspring of Japheth, the son of Noah. These guys are so bad, like they can literally drink up a lake so fast, like all the water in the lake, and they just want to destroy people. Like they will destroy any living thing in their path. I ain't trying to see them let loose. No. I'm staying in self-isolation if that's the case. But anyways, guys, moving on to number 4, we have a huge black cloud of smoke that's going to cover the entire earth. So in the Quran, it says, "So be on the watch for a day when heaven shall bring a manifest smoke covering the people. This is a painful chastisement." And that's found in Surah 44 verses 10 and 11. And then the Prophet Muhammad also said, "The hour will not rise until you have seen 10 signs, the rising of the sun from the west and the smoke the beast." And actually, let me just pause the quote right there, because there's a difference of opinion regarding whether or not the smoke mentioned in this verse in the Quran refers to the smoke that was foretold as one of the signs of the final hour. It's mentioned that the smoke will cover the earth for a period of 40 days, which will affect both believers and disbelievers. Now, the believers will be affected as if they're suffering from a common cold or something, whereas the non-believers will suffer in a much more harsher way. But let's now move on to the prophecy of the beast of the earth. Now, the beast was also mentioned in the Quran in the following verse: "We shall bring forth for them out of the earth a beast that shall speak unto them." And you can find that in Surah 27 verses 82. Now, there's differences of opinion amongst scholars regarding the details of the beast, but they are as follows. So the first is the appearance. So some scholars have held to the belief that the beast is a she-camel of the prophet Salih, and others stated that it's an animal that is a hybrid of many different animals, and others even say that this is actually a human being. Now, the next point is the place of emergence. Some scholars state that the beast will emerge from Mecca. Others say that it's going to emerge from the desert and then disappear, then emerge from a village and then disappear, and then finally from the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. Now, there's another opinion that states that this beast will emerge from Ta'if. Then the next difference is its speech. So the beast will address the people with the words of Allah, saying, "Mankind did not believe our signs," and that's in the Quran, Surah 7 verses 82, while other scholars quote Ibn Abbas that speaking refers to the action of the beast in differentiating the disbelievers from the believers. And then the final difference is the role that the beast is going to have. So the beast will be tasked to differentiate the believers from the disbelievers, and Abu Huraira narrates that the Prophet Muhammad said this: "The beast of the earth will emerge and have with it the staff of Moses and the ring of Solomon. Now, it will use these to mark off the disbelievers from the believers." But one thing scholars can agree on is that the beast is coming. Next up, prophecy number 2, we have the sun will rise from the west. So we know the sun rises in the east. Well, not that it rises in the east, but like in the eastern direction, or what we call east anyways. That's where the sun comes up, and over in the direction of the west, that's where the sun sets. But in Islam, it is prophesied that the sun will rise from the west instead of rising from the east in the end times before the day of judgment. Now, both the Quran and the Hadith, they talk about this phenomenon, and the occurrence of this phenomenon is considered in Islam as one of the major signs that indicate that the day of judgment is close. Specifically, the Quran says, "No good will it do to a person to believe then, if he believed not before, nor earned good by performing deeds of righteousness through his faith." And that's found in Surah 6 verses 158. And this verse is believed to be referring to the rising of the sun from the west, according to popular opinion of Muslim scholars. It is also believed that the Prophet Muhammad said that becoming a believer will be of no benefit after the sun rises from the west. And finally, the last prophecy to mention in this episode is the second blow of the trumpet that's gonna sound. The Prophet Muhammad, he is believed to have said that one who will blow the trumpet has been ready to do this since Allah created him. And in a quote, the Messenger of Allah said, "The gaze of the one who will blow the trumpet has been fixed since he was entrusted with it, looking towards the throne, ready to blow it in case he will be commanded to do so before he blinks, as if his eyes are two shining stars. Now, the majority of the Muslim scholars share the view that the trumpet will be blown twice. Now, on the first trumpet, all creatures will pretty much just pass out, and the second trumpet is a time of resurrection, and this is based on the verse in which the Quran says, "And the trumpet will be blown, and all who are in the heavens and all who are on the earth will swoon away, except him who Allah wills. Then it will be blown a second time, and behold, they will be standing, looking on, waiting." And you can find that in the Quran, Surah 39, verses 68. So we're starting at number 10. Let's look at the origin of life. Now, water is essential for all living things. And we all know that water is a basic need for life, but in the Quran, there's a very surprising claim in it. "We made every living thing from water. Will they not believe?" And that's found in the Quran, Surah 21, verses 30. So this verse, we see that water is pointed out as the origin of life. All living things are made up of cells, and we now know that cells are mostly made up of water. For example, 80% of cytoplasm, which are the basic cell materials of a standard animal cell, is described as water in biology textbooks. Now, the fact that living things consist mostly of water was discovered only after the invention of the microscope. In the deserts of Arabia, the last thing somebody would have guessed is that life came from water. There's also a surprising claim at number 9 about iron. So iron apparently is unnatural to Earth, and it did not form on the Earth but actually came down from outer space. This is according to many scientists who believe that billions of years ago the Earth was actually struck by meteorites, and now these meteorites were actually carrying iron from distant stars that had exploded, and they landed into Earth, and then we had iron. Now, in the Quran, it has this to say about iron. "We sent down iron with its great inherent strength and its many benefits for humankind." And you can find that in the Quran, Surah 57, verses 25. So the Quran uses the word "sent down" for iron. So this verse points that iron is not an earthly material, but was sent down for the benefit of humankind. Now, the fact that iron came down to Earth from outer space is something which could not be known by the science of the 7th century.
The giant body crashed into the center of the planet and gave Earth its iron core.
Sky's protection comes in at number 8. Now, the sky plays a very important role in protecting the Earth. The sky protects the Earth from the lethal rays of the sun. If the sky did not exist, then the sun's radiation would have killed all life on Earth. So pretty much the sky acts like a blanket wrapped around the Earth to protect it from the freezing cold of space. Now, the Quran asks people to consider and ponder upon the sky in the following verse. "We made the sky a protective ceiling, and yet they are turning away from our signs." And you can find that in the Quran, Surah 21, verse is 32. Now, the protective properties of the sky were discovered by scientific research conducted in the 20th century.
The sky protects the Earth from the lethal rays of the sun. If the sky did not exist, then the sun's radiation would have killed off all life on Earth.
Another surprising thing mentioned in the Quran at number 7 is the mountains. Now, the Quran points our attention to a very important characteristic about mountains. And the verse goes as follows. "Did we not make the earth a resting place and the mountains as stakes?" And that passage, by the way, is taken from the Quran, Surah 78, verses 6 to 7. So the Quran indicates that mountains have deep roots by using the word stakes to describe them. Now, in fact, mountains do have deep roots, and the word stakes is a very accurate description for them. Now, there's a book entitled Earth by geophysicist Frank Press, and he explains that mountains are like stakes and are buried deep under the surface of the Earth. Mount Everest, the height of which is approximately 9 kilometers above the ground, has a root deeper than 125 kilometers. Now, the fact that mountains have deep stake-like roots was not known until after the development of the theory of plate tectonics in the beginning of the 20th century. Number 6 brings us the expansion of the universe. Now, at a time when science and astronomy was still primitive, the expansion of the universe was described actually in the Quran. And in the Quran, Surah 51, verse 47, it says, "And it is we who have built the universe with our creative power and keep expanding it." Now, the fact that the universe is expanding was discovered in the last century. Now, the physicist Stephen Hawking, in his book, A Brief History of Time, writes, "The discovery that the universe is expanding was one of the great intellectual revolutions of the 20th century."
Astronomers think that the universe appears to be expanding at an accelerating rate.
Okay, so with that said, let's continue with this episode. At number 5, we have the sun's orbit. That's also mentioned in the Quran. So back in the year 1512 AD, the astronomer Nicholas Copernicus put forward his theory that the sun is motionless at the center of the solar system and that the planets revolve around it. Now, the belief that the sun is stationary was widespread amongst astronomers until the 20th century. It is now a well-established scientific fact that the sun is actually not stationary, but it's moving in an orbit around the center of our Milky Way galaxy. Now, the Quran actually mentions the orbit of the sun, and it goes as follows. It is he who created night and day, the sun and the moon, each floating in its orbit. And you can find that in Surah 21, verses 33.
It was Galileo Galilei who in 1612 observed sunspots moving across the sun's disk over time, therefore confirming the sun's rotation.
We have at number 4 an interesting mention of embryology. So check this out. This passage goes as follows. We created man from an extract of clay. Then we made him as a drop into a place of settlement, firmly fixed. Then we made the drop into an alaka. And that word, by the way, means leech, suspended thing, and blood clot. And then the passage continues as follows. Then we made the alaka into mudga, which is a chewed substance. And that is found in the Quran, Surah 23, verses 12 to 24. Now, Professor Emeritus Keith L. Moore, he's one of the world's most prominent scientists in the field of anatomy and embryology. He said this: "It's clear to me that these statements must have come to Muhammad from God, because almost all of this knowledge was not discovered until many centuries later." At number 3, we have the seas and oceans. Modern science has discovered that in the places where two different seas meet, there's actually a barrier between them. I found this really, really fascinating. Now, this barrier divides two seas so that each sea has its own temperature, salinity, as well as its density. And there's a pretty surprising passage in the Quran that goes as follows. He has set free the two seas meeting together. There is a barrier between them. They do not transgress. And that's in Surah 55, verses 19 to 20. Moving on now to number 2. We got 2 surprising things left to talk about. But number 2, we have skin pain receptors. For a long time, it was thought that the sense of feeling and pain was actually dependent on the brain. However, it's been discovered that there are pain receptors present in the skin. Without these pain receptors, a person would not even be able to feel pain anyways. Now, in the Quran, it says, "We shall send those who reject our revelations to the hellfire. When their skins have been burnt away, we shall replace them with new ones that they may continue to feel the pain. God is almighty, all-wise." And that's in Surah 4, verses 56. Now, in this episode, we've come to number 1, and we're going to be talking about lying and the frontal lobe. Now, there's actually a book titled Essentials of Anatomy and Physiology, which includes the results of research on the functions of this area, and it states, "The motivation and the foresight to plan and initiate movements occur in the anterior portion of the frontal lobes, the prefrontal area. The part of the brain that is responsible for movement is said to be seized if the man does not stop. Secondly, numerous studies have shown that the same region, the frontal lobe, is responsible for the lying function of the brain." There was, by the way, a very cruel and oppressive tribal leader known as Abu Jahl, who lived during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and in the verses of the Quran, they read as follows. "No, indeed, if he does not stop, we will seize him by his forehead, his lying, sinful forehead." And you can find that in the Quran 96, verses 15 to 16. So as you can see there, Muslims point out that the Quran does not call this person a liar, but calls his forehead, the frontal part of the brain, lying and sinful, and warns him to stop. All right, starting at number 10, let's look at embryology. In the Quran, Surah 23, verses 12 to 14, it says the following, and I quote, "And certainly did we create man from an extract of clay. Then we placed him as a sperm drop in a firm lodging. Then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot, and we made the clot into a lump of flesh, and we made from the lump bones, and we covered the bones with flesh. Then we developed him into another creation. So blessed is Allah, the best of creators." And in that passage there, we see the whole order when it comes to embryology. Now, for fact number 9, we have the universe expansion, and this is found in Surah 51, verses 47. This passage goes like this. And the heaven we constructed with strength, and indeed we are its expanders. Now, the American astronomer by the name of Edwin Hubble, he discovered that stars and galaxies continuously move away from one another, as well as moving away from our planet Earth. Now, a universe in which everything continuously moves away from one another means that the universe is continuously expanding, like infinitely expanding. The next scientific fact at number 8 is the meeting of the seas. In Surah Ar-Rahman, it states the following: He releases the two seas meeting side by side. Between them is a barrier so neither of them transgress. And that's more specifically taken from the 55th Surah, verses 19 to 20. And science has discovered that in places where two different seas actually meet, there's a barrier that divides them, which helps both the seas maintain their own temperature, and as well as the salt content of the sea, as well as its own density. Yeah, very, very interesting. All right, moving on to number 7. Let's look at the fact relating to tectonic plates. We now know that tectonic plates are produced in a process that is known as seafloor spreading, and this occurs at mid-ocean ridges where magma bursts out of the earth to produce oceanic crust. This process also produces volcanoes on the ocean floor, and those turn into seamounts. And in the Quran, Surah 50 verses 7, we find this: And the earth we spread it out and cast therein firmly set mountains and made grow therein something of every beautiful kind. Next up at number 6, let's look at meteorites. When the meteor enters the Earth's atmosphere, the meteor heats up so much that it starts to shine brightly, and the air burns up the meteorite, and then it vanishes into nothing pretty much. Now, in the Quran, Surah 52 verses 44, it actually talks about this. It says, even if they were to see lumps of the sky falling down, they would say a mass of clouds. So the people would think that there are clouds because, well, ash of the meteor, they look like clouds. We have more facts to look at. At number 5, mountains have roots and they float. Now, the highest point on Earth is in the Himalayas at Mount Everest, and this mountain has roots 256 kilometers deep. This was recorded in Life Science, Depth of Himalayan Mountain Roots Revealed back in the year of 2010. Now, the Quran, Surah 78 verses 7 says, and the mountains as pegs. Also, the Quran, Surah 75 verses 32 says, and the mountains he anchored. So pegs are used to hold, of course, a tent or other things and structures in place. So pegs are used to hold a tent or other structures in place, and pegs have part of it above the ground and part of it below the ground. Now, the Arabic word arsaha means anchored, and this is a term used that applies to ships floating on water, similar to how the mountains or many other landforms actually float above a semi-molten atmosphere. Number 4 brings us the fact of everything is in pairs. The Quran says that everything is made of pairs, and today we know that all matter is in pairs. Matter and antimatter, electrons and protons, and so on. Now, when we look in Surah 36 verses 36, it says, Glory to him who created in pairs all things that the land produces, and their own kind, and other things of that they have no knowledge of. Moving on to number 3, the atmosphere protects us. The atmosphere protects the Earth from radiation and meteorites, like I mentioned earlier, and this is actually mentioned in the Quran, and it's something that has been discovered by scientists. So take a look at Surah 21 verses 32. It says this, and we made the sky a protective shield, and they turn away from its signs. The fact number 2 leads us to sound waves. According to the University of Washington, the original sound waves were not temperature variations, but they were actually real sound waves that were spreading around the universe. When we look at Surah 41 verses 11 of the Quran, it says this, Then he directed himself to the heaven when it was smoke, and then said to it and to the earth, Come willingly or by force. They said, We do come willingly. So for this passage, the heaven is replying back, which implies that the heavens had a voice, which could mean that it emitted sound waves. Now we end this episode off with number 1, planets, stars, etc. They all move. For centuries, it was believed that the earth was fixed and that the sun and the moon and the planets revolved around the earth. But take a look at this interesting passage in the Quran, Surah 39, verses 5. This is what it says. Allah created the heavens and the earth in truth. He overlaps the night over the day and overlaps the day over the night, and enslaves the sun and the moon. All move to a pre-recorded destiny. Is he not the exalted, the forgiver?